Hi, everyone. Thanks again for inviting me to speak at this virtual conference. I'm excited to kick off this event with you today and really wish we could be in Boston together as originally planned. I want to thank Gwen Winfield and the CBRNe world for the opportunity to speak during this unique time. Despite all of the social distancing and mask wearing, we can all be proud of the contributions we are making in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. When I think of the military personnel and first responders leading the charge during this global pandemic, I am reminded how important our work is in aiding that effort and in preparing for the chemical and biological threats of the future. The oldest and simplest justification for a government is to serve as a protector for its citizens. Two easy examples are law enforcement and the military. These departments represent a response to certain problems for which it's a government's responsibility to field solutions for its citizens. The world is unstable. I'm sure that's no surprise to anyone here. For most of you in this virtual room, your role is to be ready for anything. We all recognize the importance of that readiness. But how can science and technology enhance that readiness with disruptive ideas? What does it take for the theoretical to rapidly create dramatic impact on the real-life situations that you face every day? First, the big picture. For those of you who don't know us already, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency's mission is to enable DoD and the U.S. government to prepare for and combat weapons of mass destruction and improvised threats and to ensure nuclear deterrence. DTRA, for short, is both a defense agency and a combat support agency, supporting both the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the combatant commands around the world. The Chemical and Biological Technologies Department is one of 5 technical departments within the Research and Development Directorate. Sister departments include nuclear technologies, countering weapons of mass destruction, and testing and evaluation. My office focuses on developing capabilities to defend against chemical and biological WMDs. It touches a lot of disciplines from chemistry, physics, biology, microbiology, immunology, mathematics, and many more ologies. The CBDP Enterprise is a DoD-wide effort and is comprised of the Joint Science and Technology Office, JSTO, the Joint Program Executive Office, JPEO, and the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Chemical and Biological Defense. In fact, a couple of my CBDP colleagues will be speaking here as well over the next few days. While my office is assigned to DTRA, it executes the science and technology component for the Chemical and Biological Defense Program, and as I said, is called JSTO. The fact that I wear 2 hats can be confusing to some, but it makes sense if you ever have to actually sit in my seat. The CBDP seeks to improve the biological and chemical defense capabilities of all uniformed services and reduce the threat of biological and chemical terrorism in the United States and abroad. The CBDP is focused on anticipating future threats and delivering capabilities that enable the joint force to survive, fight, and win our nation's battles in chemical and biological contested environments through coordinated efforts designed to neutralize adversarial chem-bio threats. DTRA CB has a broad mission to lead the DoD science and technology to anticipate, defend, and safeguard against chemical and biological threats for the warfighter and the nation. We do this by focusing on our 3 strategic priorities: integrated early warning, integrated layered defense, and preparing for surprise. I'm going to touch on each of these priority areas, but I want to go into a bit more depth on preparing for surprise, an especially relevant topic considering what we're dealing with an unexpected pandemic. I will also talk a little bit about the role DTRA CB is playing in the national response to COVID-19. Our first priority is integrated early warning, which is all about fusing multiple sensors with big data to give our commanders improved awareness and decision-making time on the battlefield. In the past, we had a large number of individual sensors posted around the combat zone. These sensors had to be observed by a soldier in a foxhole waiting for an audible alarm or a flashing light to go off. Meanwhile, they had a mission just as important: to watch their front for the enemy. Nothing was networked, and early warning relied on that soldier to call in a report by radio while at the same time trying to put on a mask or protective equipment. You can only imagine the chaos that ensues when a chemical attack is immediately followed by a ground attack. Needless to say, commanders found out too late that an attack was underway, and that gas cloud, well, it just kept rolling on into friendly positions, whether they were warned or not. We are working today to bring 21st century information technology such as artificial intelligence and machine learning to the front lines. We ultimately want to give our warfighters more time to prepare for threats so that they will be able to better respond. Our Perceptive Dragon series of technology demonstrations are testing out early warning capabilities by leveraging fixed site and unmanned sensor platforms using networked sensor data analytics to provide commanders with real-time battlefield information. The services have increased their demand signal since we initiated these demonstrations and see the value in man-machine interfaces that lift the fog of war through virtual immersion and synthetic environments overlaid on the real world around them. Our second priority is integrated layered defense. Too often in research and development, we try to find a single box solution to solve our problems. The fact is, it takes multiple complementary technologies in several boxes to give our warfighters the protection and capabilities they need. Vaccines give protection against known threats. Our detectors tell us to put our protective equipment on. Our diagnostics tools help us to rapidly identify the threat. And medical countermeasures treat the injured and protect the healthy. Finally, we clean up after getting dirty. Decontamination of people, equipment, and the area around us, and then we get on with the fight. But it's the integration of all these systems that gives us an edge. As a country, we've generated a lot of successes in our responses to the known problems. I want to highlight that, though, to the known problems. My final priority centers on surprise. As a combat veteran, I will tell you that we will always face surprise of some sort on the battlefield. I personally believe we have to be prepared for surprise. By this, I mean you go into battle knowing that you will be surprised. So you need to take resilient systems to the fight that are readily adaptable and flexible to meet rapid, unexpected change. You can anticipate you will be surprised by a threat, but you can't know what the surprise will be. But we need to be prepared for the surprises of tomorrow, the what ifs. History is full of surprises. Despite a cancel culture out there that would try to rewrite history or just forget it by erasing the reminders, it is extremely important that we learn from the past. About 100 years ago, the Spanish flu swept across the globe, killing tens of millions of people. Since that time, advances in biotechnology have allowed us to begin taking endemic diseases off the map. Smallpox, polio, and so on. We have collectively spent a tremendous amount of funding wiping these diseases out. Yet every year we have new flu strains, and Mother Nature can still throw us a curveball called Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus 2, aka COVID-19. Following the Ebola outbreak in 2015, my office has taken a dramatic shift towards developing resilient, flexible capabilities that can be used against emerging threats identified by the intelligence community and unexpected threats that we could not have anticipated. I call this my Preparing for Surprise portfolio. This portfolio is broken out into three components: threat agent science, detection and diagnostics, and rapid agile medical countermeasure development. The threat agent science group is tightly linked to the intelligence community. As we identify emerging threats or capability gaps on the technology horizon, this group applies an analytical methodology to determine whether something really is a threat, and if so, how bad. The threat agent science team first explores toxicity. How deadly is it? Our researchers at the DoD service laboratories and industry partners will then determine the production pathways and assess, is it easy to make or labor and cost intensive? Finally, suspect hazards will be tested in the environment to see how well they survive sunshine, rain, heat, and cold to determine residual hazard to our warfighters if they are used on the battlefield. We will also test our detectors, protective equipment, and therapeutics against suspected hazards to determine gaps for future research. Within detection and diagnostics, we have been concerned about the rapid leap in capability associated with synthetic biology and the ability to modify genomes. A determined enemy could intentionally create a pathogen that our biological detectors and field diagnostics would not quickly identify. We really don't have a detect-to-warn capability for biological threats. What I mean by this is there is no biodetector out there anywhere in the world that will sample the air and give an alarm with enough notice to allow someone to put a respirator on for protection before the hazardous biocloud goes over a combat unit. We do have a fairly robust detect to treat capability or diagnose to treat capability, but that relies on recognizing when to pull out the biodefense diagnostic assays. So how do you know you're under biological attack if the first indicator is a soldier going to a medic with a fever of unknown origin, FOUO, or other, maybe milder symptoms? In many cases, you might expect a medic to give the soldier 2 aspirin, tell him or her to drink plenty of fluids, and come back the next day if it doesn't go away. This shortfall has driven us to look for science that will give warning right of boom, but left of cough. We began assessing wearable devices about 4 years ago to see off-the-shelf items like Fitbits, Garmin watches, Apple watches, and Oura Ring might give enough biometric data to predict that someone is getting sick before they even know it. Think of it as a check engine light. Last year, following studies conducted by MIT and Philips Health, we found that one can predict the onset of hospital-acquired infections using a machine learning tool to analyze the data and get approximately a 70% confidence rate. Not bad for a detection capability, considering some cancer diagnostics are in a similar range. We are currently in the process of training a machine learning algorithm called Rapid Assessment of Threat Agent Exposure, or RATE, to determine if it's possible to detect a COVID infection up to 48 hours prior to onset, and even better, could we detect if a non-symptomatic carrier could be identified? On the battlefield, a tool like this would quickly cue a commander that something was wrong. The next tool we've been developing in this space is a rapid diagnostic from MeMed that would simply let a medic know that someone has a viral or bacterial infection. While that sounds simple, antibiotics are overprescribed at a tremendous rate in our nation because it sometimes takes days to determine what disease is causing the fever. This kind of cheap diagnostic test could also make a good screening tool to reduce the use of more expensive devices such as a COVID diagnostic, which are in limited supply. If this test comes up with a bacterial infection, no need to use the COVID test. Additionally, this device could be used as a tool for general troop health surveillance when facing off with a nation that might be suspected of creating biological weapons. A third tool under development in this space is rapid genomic sequencing. I think one day we will be sequencing everything in our blood and in the environment to figure out what we have been exposed to and is it harmful. When faced with bioweapons on the battlefield, it is critical to rapidly identify a biothreat so that the stockpile of therapeutics can be assessed for efficacy. Sequencing requires tremendous bioinformatics horsepower to eliminate the normal biome from the engineered, another growth area within our enterprise. Finally, in rapid and agile medical countermeasure development, we have been working actively with our acquisition partners at the Joint Program Executive Office to install safe and effective platform technologies at the DoD's Advanced Development and Manufacturing Facility in Florida. This is a unique small-scale drug production facility that uses what I call plastic and disposable facilities to quickly produce vaccines and therapeutics for the DoD on short timetables. Over the last few years, we have installed several platforms that are turning out to be good selections. One is a monoclonal antibody production line. Following the successful development of the ZMapp monoclonal therapeutic to treat Ebola in 2015, we started efforts to produce monoclonal antibodies to defeat botulinum toxin strains A and B. This program was twofold: produce a product that meets warfighter needs and install a platform capability that could be repurposed quickly to orient on new threats. Sounds like the situation we're in today. Monoclonal antibodies were chosen as the first platform because there are over 67 FDA-approved monoclonal drugs on the market now, and they have a strong safety record. Soon after the pandemic for COVID was announced, DARPA and the JPO began research to determine the correct monoclonal antibody or antibody cocktail to use to support beating the virus. 2 years ago, we started another platform that was much riskier, a DNA vaccine designed to defeat Venezuelan equine encephalitis virus, a nasty disease the former Soviet Union attempted to weaponize as a surprise for us during the Cold War. At that time, there were only 2 vaccines moving down the FDA regulatory pathway towards licensure that were based on DNA components. Our end goal on this vaccine was really us placing a bet on science. The ribonucleic acids necessary to create a DNA-based vaccine are relatively shelf-stable. Wouldn't it be awesome if we could just carry the nucleic acid precursors into battle and then literally create vaccines on demand out of a suitcase right there on the front line of the battlefield? That's one of the capabilities we see on the technology horizon. Soon after the pandemic began, BARDA began exploring the idea of using DNA-based vaccines as well. As a third example, the Ebola vaccine licensed by Merck using a cow virus platform called vesicular stomatitis virus, or VSV for short. Our office recently received CARES Act funding to support the development of this platform to create a COVID-19 vaccine. The race with Operation Warp Speed is on. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the very significant role being played by our efforts to use robust artificial intelligence and machine learning tools to analyze terabytes of sequencing data in seconds to minutes. We can quickly understand new threats. One of these AI/ML projects is called Discovery of Medical Countermeasures Against Novel Entities, or DOMAIN. The intent of DOMAIN is to use AI/ML tools to rapidly identify drugs that are already FDA approved that may be useful against a new threat. In fact, DOMAIN was used to identify two therapeutics to treat COVID-19, famotidine, the active ingredient in Pepcid-AC, and celecoxib, the active ingredient in Celebrex. For those who didn't hear, President Trump was put on a famotidine regimen while he was being treated for COVID-19 at Walter Reed. Because he was treated with so many other drugs, we cannot claim victory for being the cure. However, we can say there's a little bit of DTRA science going on in the president right now. We have watched the steady increase of use of chemical weapons on the battlefield. The use of chlorine and mustard gas in Syria, followed by VX nerve agent in Malaysia, and fourth-generation nerve agents in the UK and in Europe. These all point to an eroded treaty containment system, one in which signatories who do not wish to comply will hide their efforts in dual-use technologies and pull out weapons as surprises for us when we do not expect it. The tremendous growth we are seeing in the biotech industry only leads me to further believe that we cannot have one bug, one drug solutions. We will have to out-science and out-innovate our foes, and in some cases, Mother Nature, in order to be ready for the next big event. We have learned that we must create capabilities in days, weeks, and worst case, months. We must create today the adaptable, flexible platform technologies necessary to address tomorrow's threats. We need to expect the unexpected. Despite that, my office is creating tools and platforms that will rapidly adapt to a changing biological threat environment. Additionally, the tools we are developing to combat biological weapons of mass destruction can be repurposed by our interagency partners to defeat COVID-19 and whatever the next pandemic might be. While science and technology provide the answers, the solutions need partnerships. We can't do it alone. We form partnerships with organizations across our government, industry, academia, and laboratories. As when it comes to truly disruptive ideas, it usually takes a whole-of-government approach. In the COVID pandemic, we are seeing a whole-of-Earth approach coming together to address the outbreak. We work with many allies across the globe to jointly expand our nation's abilities to counter and defeat chemical and biological threats to our warfighters and our nation. I am happy to report we are making progress against these challenges. We are in the fight against COVID, and we will be ready to respond with science and technology in the next big event. We are DTRA, and we are the Chemical and Biological Defense Program. To learn more, please join us on Twitter, Facebook, and even Instagram. Thank you for participating today, and I think I have some time now. We can take some questions.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining the live Q&A session. I'd like to thank all the speakers that gave such a great job this morning in terms of talking about the work that they and the rest of their teams are doing. So we're going to have a live Q&A. We've set up some questions. Sadly, AD Allway couldn't be with us because of security issues using Zoom. So I'm now going to hand over to the first sort of individual, and that's Dr. Hann, in terms of the whether vaccines and therapeutic processes can be applied to non-medical capability development in a similar manner? Dr. Hann.
That was actually a good question from, I think it was William King that put that on. You know, the JPO working with Operation Warp Speed has done a tremendous job of being able to look at how we do the FDA regulatory process. And as Jason said in his presentation, do that kind of parallel planning and execution that typically puts a company at high risk because, you know, at the same time you're doing clinical trials, you're also mass producing manufacturing material. And I think that's been a great approach. It's cut off years in the process and still is safe. It still is a very safe process. So I thought that's a great question. Now, applying a similar kind of process to capability development for things like decontaminants or coatings or stuff like that, it's a slightly different process. So kind of as I was getting into the chat, one of the processes we're using is a technology demonstration kind of spiral development kind of process that we look at what's on the technology horizon. We bring that in and produce breadboards and initial prototypes and put that into the hands of the warfighter and say, if I gave you this capability, does this actually help you or not? Based on that feedback, we'll create a second generation prototype, take that out to a little bit more rugged kind of field demonstration, get feedback on that. And from that, we actually are starting to be able to kind of get the requirements meeting the technology capability at the same time, so that as we're going on to transition items to the Joint Program Executive Office, we're actually creating the devices as prototypes that then can go on to be, you know, part of the fielding process. And, you know, uniquely in the last couple of years, we've been using a contracting mechanism called the Other Transaction Authority, OTA, that allows us to jointly fund efforts between the S&T program and the Advanced Development Program. So as things are being developed, if it meets the need, it helps the JPO pick things up quicker. So there are different techniques that we're using both within the contracting process, user interaction, and presenting technologies earlier, trying to speed up the development of capabilities from the traditional, you know, capability development process that we use. So that's kind of how I would address that question.
And a PPE question for Dr. Moore. How well would you assess we're working as an integrated team with other labs and industry partners to develop single ensembles from top of the head to the bottom of the feet that protect the whole warfighter or first responder against all threats, but also providing real-time health and CBRN surveillance?
So that's a big question. That's a William King question. So I appreciate that, William. So to a large extent, this is kind of the operating model throughout the Kimbau Defense Program as an enterprise overall. Specifically as a lab, you know, we really strive to work and find strong integrated teams that we can work with industry and academic partners. But beyond that, this is a larger Kimbau Defense Program enterprise strategic approach to how we look at warfighter solutions that require requirements. And in the Army Futures Command, of course, we're always looking at concepts to requirements to try to shorten that timeline to a large extent. So we have pieces of this already. So, and some of this I can also punt some of this to Dr. Hann and to Dr. Roos as well from the JSTO and JPEO perspective. So, but yes, aspects of this are occurring. And while there is some symbiotic relationship and synergy between what the first responder community uses and what the more specialized military units use, there's also some differences. And so it's not necessarily at this point a one size fits all. So I know just the kind of modus operandi for the program overall is to have more industry, academic partners, to team with other laboratories, DoD and national laboratories, as well as other laboratories, FFRDCs, et cetera, to try to hit some of this. But if you look holistically through, I know Ron has an initiative at JSTO that looks at trying to integrate lab on a chip, wearable technology, et cetera. We're doing aspects of that as well for them, as well as for other customers throughout the government and other agencies. In addition to that, I looked and I saw that it's kind of the CBRN surveillance, communications, situational awareness. Some of that occurs even from other offshoot technologies like the NBC reconnaissance vehicle, sensor suite upgrade. Some of those technologies could be integrated into other platforms as well. But at this point, I'll pause. I don't know if Jason or Ron want to chime in as well.
Gents, anything, Dr. Roos, Dr. Hann, anything you want to add?
Well, I'll just say the Kimbau Center is an exceptional partner for us. They have a superior workforce that's very responsive to the crazy silliness that comes out of the science technology program of how we look at things differently and then try to think outside the box. And there's a lot that goes on there that really makes a big difference. And we really see them as one of our essential partners in translating that thing, those science and things that we see on the technology horizon coming out of colleges and universities. These are folks that create those first initial prototypes that kind of see can we actually do something? Because that's often our first question: can I do it or not? We don't often ask how much does it cost. We just say, can I do it? And then we go about facing, what's the battery type and how long does it last in the field and can it take extremes and all that stuff. But CBC has been a great partner and really has made a big difference in how we go about doing what we do. And they're essential, as part of that technology demonstration program that I was discussing earlier, in bringing technologies to the field and helping us testing out in rugged situations to see if it actually is meeting warfighter need. And that really, for our program is important because the worst thing we can do is spend a lot of money on a capability and it gets out to the field to the warfighter and he's scratching his head, what am I supposed to do with this box? And they throw it in the back of a Connex. So we want to get that addressed early on, and that's where CBC really helps. It's a tremendous help to us.
So, Ron and Eric, thank you. I think, from our perspective, as we look into the future, as we've all discussed, this sort of system of systems, this integration of sensing, of protection, and even medical is converging and is what's necessary in that future operating environment. Ideally, as we've discussed, as we move towards integrated early warning and the ability for our service members to have that situational awareness of what's going on in their environment, and even potentially in the future have their protective gear adapt without them even having to take any steps physical, put on a suit or anything. It just the suit itself adapts to a health hazard. There's certainly opportunity as we look on the horizon of where technology is to integrate what we're doing in the chem biodefense world with other sensing technologies outside. I know, for example, the Army is looking at their IVAS program, which is their heads-up display, and how they're integrating multiple pieces of information. Having data feeds flow into that from the CBRN space is going to be critical in the future, providing that full situational awareness picture. So as we move forward as a community, definitely being able to integrate not only integrate that CBRN surveillance communication picture into along with our protective gear, I think is going to be essential. And what I'm excited about is that I think what we're experiencing now in the COVID space is really propelling this notion of soldier worn or warfighter worn technology that can help commanders and have real-time visibility on their health, on their physiological status. That's been I got mine on too. That's been a challenge. Conceptually, it's something we've all, it's the holy grail we've been going for, but I think COVID is going to help get us over the hump there in really looking at how we can implement that technology beyond this event.
And a question for Dr. Roos from the floor. It's clear that the feature of battlefield situational awareness relies on a high degree of data integration and companion decision support tools. How is the CB Defense Program thinking about integrating with the larger battlefield data environment?
I think it's absolutely necessary. For the chem biodefense community as itself, while we are a data pool, we're a drop in a large lake of data that our future operators are going to need to be able to have integrated to have that full situational awareness picture. And so in that future environment, as we're looking at how do we integrate, it's not how is ChemBio a separate data special system on its own. It's how do we integrate that data into the larger systems that are going on within the military. So whether it's the JADC2 environment, and other service architectures, how are we, we're looking at how we very deliberately tie into those. So working with our other program executive offices within the Army and the other services. Ron, I don't know if you have any more to add to that, because I know your folks out of John Hannon's group are doing a lot in that space.
No, you're exactly right. So we've talked before that there are multiple common operating pictures out there that the commanders use on the battlefield for how they go about making decisions. And it's important for us to be able to put, applications and things onto the devices that they're using every day. And it becomes a drop-down application on that product. Having a separate product actually becomes distracting. And when time is important, you can't be looking at a laptop on one side and looking up at the commander screen on the other side and trying to figure out how they match with each other, because seconds are lives. So we really are looking at those common architectures, as Jason indicated, like the Android tactical application kit, where we can make base applications, do the base code, and then adapt it to multiple platforms. That's one technique we're looking at. And it's very important to get those feeds on where the commander is using it. And often I think about there's three kind of users as we go about it. There's the user at the very first level who basically needs a warning that says, put your mask on, take your mask off. They don't need a lot of data. There's a commander level application where a commander needs to be able to look at a screen and in 30 seconds, understand what he's seeing and make a decision. And in between is that really advanced user who's putting all the data together, synchronizing what they're seeing, coming up with the human machine interface that then provides decision options to a commander. So, there's kind of a tier of who uses the applications, what is the data that's essential for each tier, and how's that information transmitted, how quickly, what parts can be automated or not automated, and then go from there. But we're looking at all those aspects of how we bring, communication architecture to the battlefield to lift the fog of war so that commanders can make timely decisions. Because that gas cloud, it doesn't care, how long it takes us to figure it out. It is rolling down. That is physics. So then how fast can I get ahead of that cloud, and how can I use information technology to do that? Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Ron.
I will say the virtual events are far more chatty in questions than live events, and an automated system means we're going to get cut off in about 4 minutes. So quickly to Christina then. I mean, there was some sort of chat about drones, and I wonder whether there's a command element problem that individuals are worried about taking a drone down because that might well be the terrorist's decision. So how do you get a sort of a go, no go, because it's eventually going to get to its destination, to be able to try and stop it?
So a couple of the different things that we've looked at from the drone perspective is, what is the payload? Is the drone trying to come at you as an active shooter type of situation, or is the drone carrying something that it's dispersing? If the drone is coming as an active shooter type of situation, then taking it down in the location of interest is not necessarily a bad idea, because you're still going to be able to contain that threat. If you took the same drone that was spreading a chemical dispersal device and took it down, then you are now putting that entire chemical payload into the area that they're trying to target. And so in that case, we try to look at it as try to stop from making new plans. Use the two plans that you have in place already. You have an active shooter plan and you have an overhead threat plan that we generally call a severe weather plan. And so each of those ends up with the same results. You get people out of the way of the threat and you try to get them undercover or into spaces. When you use the active shooter threat, you obviously go to different places that you might go just for an overhead threat. But it's about not trying to have a specific plan for every single threat, but to have different types of plans that can be applied as the threat changes, whether it's just a standard aerial threat, or which could be lightning, or it could be a drone with a chemical payload, okay? Or it's a standard shooter threat where that could be a static person, or it could be something that's on a drone. And that's what we're talking about, is trying to keep the number of plans that you have to a minimum and knowing when to apply those different plans in given situations. And
a quick question for Colonel Riley, and I don't know whether Dr. Roos can jump in, but in terms of the process for industry managing to sell equipment to CBRN, what's the best way for them to do it?
Well, obviously, as I mentioned in our presentation, we'll work through Systems Command and then through Dr. Roos's team to select that equipment. Obviously, we can be contacted if somebody wants to demonstrate something for us. We're happy. I can contact Dr. Schwartz, or my information that was on the slide presentation. And I know Dr. Schwartz has also put his information out there. But anytime we're going to actually select anything, we'll go through Systems Command to the Program Executive Office.
Yeah, and I'll just add, echo what Colonel Riley said. So anybody wants to reach out to us for a demonstration, we're happy to have you come in and show us. In terms of how to acquire equipment, there's many different mechanisms with which we use. We have our annual APBI, which is we go out and talk about all of the different opportunities there are across our portfolio. We often will put out requests for information, as well as we have our two other transaction consortia that we work through, our CWMP consortia and our medical, CBRN Medical MCDC consortia. So the informal mechanisms of coming to us and providing us demonstrations, as well as the formal mechanisms through which we solicit all of our work, which most of those opportunities you can find on our website.
Fantastic. Thank you, gentlemen. Even though we're still going, the whole kind of dotted out halfway through Dr. Roos's comments. So I'll gather in any other questions people might well have, and I'll sort of shoot them over to your teams and get a sort of response, and then get it back up on the site.